Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here, taking a look at the very one stakes on a Saturday at Gulfstream Park. Don't want to get those articles wrong because I know this race is named after a horse named the Very One who did excel in some turf marathons, and that's what this race is. It's a race going 1.3 miles on the turf course at Gulfstream Park for the Fillies and Mares Race 6 on a 14 race card on Saturday at Gulfstream. And Craig, we've got a field of 10 signed on with a pretty strong presence from the Chad Brown stable.
Yeah, not unusual for turf, particularly in the filly and mare division, but I think it's a good competitive race. There's only one horse I think we're really not going to talk about too much in here. And you can tell by the morning line, 7 of the 10 are single digits. So I think it is a good betting contest.
Before we get into the main contenders, let's take a look at some features in Timeform US. First up is the pace projector. And Craig, I know the pace projectors are always difficult to make sense of in these marathon races where the paces can vary so much. And an additional wild card in this race is the presence of the number 1 libretto, the long shot that we're not going to talk about too much as far as her chances of winning the race, but she could have an impact on the pace. And you do see that fast pace flag showing up with those new Timeform US graphics. She's a horse that is kind of an odd presence in this race, a maiden, 0-7 in her career. But I would imagine if she is running, they're probably going to go forward with her.
You would think so. She's a filly who's been running in some 5.5 furlong races not too long ago. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't run in here, because when I saw the entry, I thought maybe she was a rabbit for somebody, but it doesn't really appear to be the case. So not sure what she's doing in here, but if she does go, I can't argue with the pace projector. She certainly can make the front if she wants it.
I would note the positioning of the morning line favorite, the number 10 Virginia Joy, who's shown all the way back in, I think, 8th or 9th place on the pace projector. She is a horse that's been successful on the lead in the past, but has done so setting slow paces, so unlikely to be attaining that early position in this race. Let's also take a look at the Timeform US finish projector. This is a new feature in Timeform US that you can access from your DRF mobile PPs by tapping on that Timeform US tab. And Craig, this is based heavily on speed figures, also taking into account the pace projector. So we see some of those Chad Brown runners shown towards the front. The number 7 Higher Truth is predicted by the algorithm to be the winner of this race. She is coming in off some pretty strong speed figures. We'll talk about her in just a little bit. Another horse who's in between those Chad Brown runners is the number 3 Lady Rockstar, earning, I think, the best last out Timeform US speed figure in the field when she got a 120.
Yeah, no big surprises in this Timeform US finish projector. The top 3 choices are on the morning line, or also the top 3 here, just not in any the same order. Higher Truth earned those top figures. It's been a while, as we're going to get into in notes. So it'll be interesting to see how she does here, which I'm sure we're going to get into.
Let's start to go through some of these contenders, and we'll begin with the local prep for this, the Very One Stakes. That was the La Prevoyante back in late January, and we'll take a look at the stretch run of that race. We've got 2 runners coming out of here, the 2nd place finisher, Transient, and the 4th place finisher, Beside Herself. Craig, Beside Herself was involved in the early pace and just kind of backed up with the stretch. Transient, I think, is the one that you want to pay attention to. Tyler Gaffalin, you could see right there, drops the whip in the stretch. Maybe that cost her a little bit of extra oomph at the end of this race, but she's one that, all things considered, got a decent trip, though I did note in the early portions of this race, she was having some trouble settling, despite the fact that the pace was fast. She was getting a little bit keen, and that can be an issue for her at times. She is one that likes to be forwardly placed.
Yeah, we can see it, particularly when she went 1.25 miles. She was up on the front on very fast fractions at Woodbine. She was rated off of that very fast pace last time, and it worked out well. But as you say, I'm not sure she was a fan of it. So she ran a nice race. I mean, no doubt about it, being able to stick close to that fast pace. It's just a matter of if she can handle what I would say is a step up in class. Both that race and this race are grade 3s on paper, but I think this one's a little bit stronger.
I would agree with that. I thought that La Proveillante was just a softer field overall. The other horse coming out of that race is Beside Herself, and like I was mentioning, Craig, she is one that does have do her best running on the front end. So I think they'll have intentions of going forward with her, even though she wasn't shown as the clear leader on the pace projector. I'd imagine they'll try to get there. They weren't able to do so last time because another rival, I believe, third place finisher Adventuring, was more aggressively ridden to the front end, and she is a filly that likes to set paces up front, but she's been involved in a lot of fast paces recently. The problem is she might get another one on Saturday.
I'd agree with that. I'd maybe give her a longer look if for some reason Libretto was scratched and didn't run in here, but it just looks like more of the same for her, where she's going to want to go to the front end. Luis Saez is a rider who's usually pretty aggressive, and I would imagine he'll try for the front end, but I can envision a race where we just see a bunch more red coated fractions early in the race, and that will be to her detriment.
Let's move to her outside and take a look at a horse coming out of a different race at Gulfstream Park. That is the Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf, and Lady Rockstar was third in that race. And this was a pretty good field for a grade 3, Craig. I know that both this race and the La Proveillante were both grade 3 events. I thought this was a much stronger grade 3, as Queen Goddess, the winner of this race, seems like a filly for the Michael McCarthy barn that has really stepped forward lately. Shantosara, a good runner from Chad Brown, she was second. So no disgrace for Lady Rockstar losing to those two. I think the big question for her is going to be the stretch out to the mile and 3/8 distance.
I would agree. She's run some good figures. You can note last time we have that P in next to the 119 race rating that indicates the speed figure was adjusted because of the pace. And in this particular case, it was because the pace was so fast. This race actually came back with a really fast time that we downgraded a bit because of that early pace. But I don't think that's a knock on Lady Rockstar, because she was fairly close up. I mean, even though she was sixth in a field of 8 early, kind of sat fifth, it's not like she dropped way out of it. She was always in contention. The big question, as you note, is the distance. You don't have to go too far back to find her longest race in recent times, that 1.25 mile allowance win at Belmont Park. Her speed figures seem to be progressing nicely, so I feel she's a pretty strong contender.
Yeah, I won't be surprised at all if she handles it. I know she's a daughter of Frankel, who you associate more with 1 mile distances, but Frankel's progeny have had a lot of success going longer over in Europe. So I think Lady Rockstar is definitely a candidate to win this race. Let's move to her outside, and one of the Chad Brown runners in this race is the number 4, My Lady. She is a horse that spent most of her career racing in Germany in some group level races. Actually was second in the German 1000 Guineas, third in the German Oaks Group 1 event back last August. She made one start in North America for a different barn last time and wasn't really competitive with those horses, was in the mix until the stretch and then just kind of faded in the late stages. Now she's switching into the Chad Brown barn.
And I would say that last time was a very weak grade 1. You can see it in our race rating. It's a 113, which is the same rating that La Previante got. And it just wasn't a true grade 1. So I'm a little down on her in this spot. It's unusual to see a horse moving to the Chad Brown barn go off at 8-1, the morning line of 8-1. But the one thing I'll note when I was digging through Formulator is when these horses aren't bet heavily first time in his barn, they usually don't run very well.
Yeah, typically these types can be well meant, and the fact that this one has a low profile rider named, a rider that Chad Brown doesn't use that often, maybe not a great sign that this is the third string of the 3 Chad Brown runners entered in here. To her outside is the number 5 Broadway Boogie, and let's take a look at her last race when she was competing, going a little bit further than this, the 1.5 mile distance at Gulfstream Park, winning a N1X allowance race. And Craig, the one thing you can say about this 4-year-old filly is that it does seem like she's improving with every start, especially since they started going longer distances.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence. She seemed to really relish the longer distance last time. She's a filly who's just getting better at the right time. And as you noted, she is a 4-year-old, so she has every right to improve. And that explosion last time at 1.5 miles was just a really big jump for her. She's still got some work to go. This is a pretty steep jump up for her from all the way from a non-winners of 1 in the graded stakes. But if things get really hot up front, I wouldn't be surprised if she's making a run late.
Yeah, she does feel like one that's certainly going to get the distance. Quality is the big question for her. She's kind of got this interesting way of running. You saw in that replay with her head really low to the ground, kind of reminiscent of AP Indy from the early 90s. It must be a difficult horse for riders to get balance on, but she just is kind of that one-paced sort that doesn't have a big turn of foot. So if this race does turn into a sprint to the finish, that might not work in her favor. I think her rider, who was also on her last time, would be wise to make that same kind of move where they try to break the race open around the far turn, because she might not have the same kick as some others in this field. Let's move on to one of the Chad Brown runners, another one in here. That is the number 7, Higher Truth. And we'll take a look at her last race, which came all the way back last summer in July at Belmont Park. And this was actually her only start in 2022 when she was a 4-year-old. Clearly, there have been some issues keeping this daughter of Galileo on the racetrack. But Greg, this lone appearance last year was pretty good. She wasn't beating a field of this quality, but actually some of the horses that finished behind her have come back to do some decent things. The runner-up in this race, Flanagan's Code, who was beaten nearly 5 lengths, came back to finish 4th in a graded stakes at Saratoga. So it wasn't like she was beating a terrible field last time, and she certainly has the speed figures from her 3-year-old season to suggest with any kind of natural improvement, she could be tough in this field.
No doubt. Her speed figures point to her as a strong contender. I wouldn't even argue if people thought she is the most likeliest winner in here. I could see that. The obvious question is she's had one race in 500 days. So she obviously has some issues. She's coming off a long layoff, but we see she did that in July without many problems. This is a tougher spot. It's one of those, I think you have to let value be your guide and kind of watch the board and see if she really does go off near that morning line.
Yeah, the good news is Chad Brown is one of the best layoff trainers in the country, especially with horses in these turf routes. So maybe you can have a little more confidence than you would in a different barn with Higher Truth coming back off this kind of layoff. Her outside is the number 8, Ensemble, and kind of like Broadway Boogie, who we just discussed, she's a horse who needs to get a real class test because she got the 1.5-mile distance last time pretty impressively against N1X allowance competition. Now she's stepping up against stakes foes for the first time in this country. So she's got to prove that last effort, which was on the Tapeta surface, was no fluke.
Yeah, she actually has a little bit better speed figure than Broadway Boogie got in her win, but I prefer the other one to this one. I think maybe this horse just like the synthetic a little more. She's a 5-year-old. We've seen what she can do on turf. So I personally would think that jump up is more due to the surface and the weaker competition. That wasn't off the turf race, so it just wasn't the strongest field in there. Didn't lose a whole lot with scratches, but there just wasn't a lot in here, and she was much better. So I would be more surprised by her than I would Broadway Boogie.
Kind of interesting looking at those two N1X fields that each of these fillies beat. The same horse was behind both of them, Bravo Kitten, who was 3rd behind Broadway Boogie and 2nd behind Ensemble, beaten 10 lengths by the latter and 8 lengths by the former. Make of that what you will. But they do both have to step up in class. Flying Fortress, drawn towards the outside, going out for the Shug McGahee barn. She's another runner that has some things to prove from a class standpoint, Craig, also making this switch from the Tapeta surface back to turf, although she's run comparable numbers on the turf in the past, particularly 2 back in that Dowager Stakes at Keeneland, but that was her best time Formula speed figure, 1:11, and she really wasn't too competitive at the grade 3 level, so she's going to have to do better.
Definitely. I mean, as we see that 111, the race rating for this race, I believe, is a 118. So that is a pretty big jump. It's also notable that she's a horse that likes to run on the front end, and she's probably going to have some company up there as well.
And the final horse we'll discuss is that morning line favorite. I think she'll be the most fancied runner from the Chad Brown barn, and that is the number 10, Virginia Joy. And we're going to go 2 back to take a look at her probably greatest career victory in the Grade 2 Flower Bowl last summer at Saratoga. And she's beating a pretty good one on this day, as the heavy favorite in this race was Warlike Goddess, who is that horse making a big late push at Virginia Joy in the late stages. But Virginia Joy was able to hold her off and cause the upset on this day, going off at 9-2. The pace played a big role in that outcome, Craig. You can see those pace figures all blue color-coded in the time form USPPs that obviously worked to her advantage and worked against the classy Warlike Goddess. Virginia Joy came back last time in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. A 1 3/16 is probably on the short side for her. I think she'll be more comfortable stretching it back out to this 11 furlongs.
She's consistent, if nothing else, and you can see that huge pace upgrade in her win. That's actually a race I'm pretty proud of with the pace upgrade, because when you look through the chart, nearly every horse has come back to match the figure they were given that day. Virginia Joy obviously seems to run the same. I can't help get past it. I think her reputation's still going to be a bit inflated because of that race. If you look at the chart, you'll see even in defeat, Warlike Goddess got a 7-point higher time form US speed figure on that day. So she's one that I just think is probably going to be overbet. I certainly think she can win, but she wouldn't be my top pick just based on value.
And I would just note, she does have that one standout time form US speed figure of 124.5 back at Belmont Park when she won that Sheepshead Bay. That's a number that I think you would agree with me, Craig, might not be the most predictive moving forward. That race was run in a total bog. Front runners were being favored. She got loose on the front end. Very unlikely to receive conditions that are anything like that on Saturday at Gulfstream Park. So I think she's better judged off her recent form, which certainly makes her a contender, but doesn't necessarily make her a standout in this race. Let's throw up our top picks for this, the very one stakes. And Craig and I, we have pretty much the same horses in the mix, just in a slightly different order. I put the number 7 Higher Truth on top, going for that other Chad Brown trainee. Just feel like if she can take a step forward from the kind of form that we saw out of her as a 3-year-old, she'll be very competitive with her stablemate. And maybe with Irad Ortiz riding the other one, riding Virginia Joy, Higher Truth could be a slightly better price. So I put her on top. They were the main two for me, but I have no real argument with Greg's pick of the number 3, Lady Rockstar.
Yeah, I think we're both looking for a little more value than we would get for Virginia Joy in here. Lady Rockstar comes out of the Pegasus World Cup filly and Mare Turf, a race I think we both agree was much stronger than the grade 3 that it is on paper. She has good speed figures. The distance is a little bit of a question, but I really like their 1.25 mile race, and I don't think the additional furlong will be any real problem.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think she is definitely one of the win candidates in this, the very one stakes on Saturday at Gulfstream Park. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.